He's considered to be the oldest human mummy found intact, and scientists believe he died more than 5,000 years ago. Because of new DNA technology, they're reimagining what he actually looked like. CNN's Michael Holmes.
Over 5,000 years ago, a man was frozen high in the Alps.
We're going to start with the man of the hour, Ötzi the Iceman.
His body perfectly preserved in ice. When scientists sequenced Ötzi the Iceman's DNA, they uncovered secrets no one expected. Could his ancestry hold the key to a hidden past? Join us as we uncover the details of what they found and how it shocked the entire world. The frozen mystery of Ötzi the Iceman. On a crisp September day in 1991, what started as a peaceful mountain hike became one of the most astonishing archaeological discoveries of modern times. Erica and Helmut Simon, experienced hikers, were making their way through a rugged mountain pass in the Ötztal Alps, on the border of Austria and Italy. The air was thin, the terrain was harsh, and the glacier still held its icy grip on the landscape. But the late summer sun had softened the ice just enough to reveal something completely unexpected. There, partly buried in melting ice, lay the still form of a human body. At first, the couple thought they had found a climber who had recently perished in the unforgiving mountains. But as they drew closer, it became clear that this was something far older, far stranger. The body wasn't dressed in modern climbing clothes or carrying contemporary gear. Instead, the man wore thick leather shoes stuffed with grass for insulation, an old and surprisingly effective way to keep feet warm. Clutched in his possession was a copper axe, its blade stained with the greenish tint of age. The most startling detail, however, was how well his body had been preserved. His skin was darkened and leathery, but intact. The ice and freezing temperatures had protected his body for centuries, keeping his features eerily recognizable. News of the find spread quickly. Authorities were called in, and helicopters soon brought in experts and archaeologists. What began as what looked like a rescue soon turned into a major scientific investigation. Carbon dating and forensic tests soon revealed the truth. The man had been frozen for more than 5,000 years. He lived during the Copper Age, around 3,300 BCE, a time when humans were just beginning to work with metal. He was named Ötzi, after the valley where he was discovered. But Ötzi was more than just a frozen body. He was a glimpse into an ancient world. Every detail of his clothes, tools, and even his skin offered clues to life thousands of years ago. Yet the deeper researchers looked, the more mysteries they uncovered, especially about his death, which turned out to be far from peaceful. Forensic analysis showed that Ötzi was around 45 years old when he passed away. In his time, this was already considered old age, yet his body suggested he was strong and well adapted to his environment. He stood about 5 feet 3 inches tall and weighed roughly 110 pounds. Though small by today's standards, his bones and muscles revealed the life of a man used to hard work and survival in the wild mountain terrain. One of the most fascinating features on his body was a set of 61 tattoos. They were not decorative designs, but were carefully placed along joints and areas where he may have felt pain from arthritis. Scientists believe these markings might have been part of an early form of medical treatment, perhaps similar to acupuncture. These small details showed that even thousands of years ago, people had ways to try to ease pain and treat illnesses. His clothing also spoke volumes about his skill and resourcefulness. He wore leggings made from goat hide, a bearskin cap for warmth, and a grass-woven cloak for extra insulation. Every piece of his outfit was carefully made for survival, not for style. He was dressed to face the cold, the wind, and the tough alpine environment. The items Ötzi carried revealed that he was a man of his time, but also someone who had access to rare and valuable tools. He carried a flint knife with a finely worked handle, a longbow, and a copper axe. The axe, in particular, amazed historians. In the Copper Age, owning a tool like this was unusual. Copper was expensive and difficult to work with, and not everyone could afford or create such a weapon. The copper axe was both a practical tool and a sign of status. It could be used for chopping wood, hunting, or self-defense. This single object suggested that Ötzi may have been someone of importance in his community. Although his body was preserved, it also held the evidence of his final hours. Forensic studies revealed that his death was not the result of an accident or simply being caught in the freezing mountains. Instead, it appeared he had been attacked. His left hand had a deep wound, possibly from defending himself. His ribs bore signs of bruising or fractures, indicating he had been in a violent struggle. The most telling clue was an arrowhead lodged deep in his left shoulder, cutting through a major artery. This injury would have caused him to bleed to death. It was no accident, it was a deliberate act. Blood from 4 other individuals was found on his clothing and belongings, suggesting he may not have been alone when the attack happened. Whether they were allies or attackers remains unknown. Adding to the tragedy, Ötzi also suffered from atherosclerosis, a condition that could have led to a heart attack if he had lived longer. The location where he passed away, high in the mountains, suggested he may have been fleeing from someone or something. Perhaps he was hunted down, a victim of tribal conflict, or caught in a personal dispute. The details remain uncertain. But one thing is clear: his life ended violently. The discovery of Ötzi changed what scientists knew about life 5,000 years ago. His body and belongings offered rare insight into the daily struggles, survival skills, and dangers faced by people of his time. His tattoos, clothing, and weapons showed a blend of skill, intelligence, and adaptation to a harsh world. His death revealed that even in the ancient past, violence between humans was a part of life. But how were scientists able to find out his identity after so many years of his existence? Ötzi's DNA mystery: how science got it wrong. Years after Ötzi's frozen body was discovered in the Alps, the fascination with him only grew stronger. His perfectly preserved remains, locked away in ice for more than 5,000 years, had become a time capsule, offering scientists an extraordinary chance to look directly into the past. Determined to understand who he was, how he lived, and where he came from, researchers studied him in the most careful and detailed ways possible. They examined his skin, his clothes, and even what was inside his stomach, piecing together a clearer picture of his final hours. Analysis revealed that his last meal consisted of dried ibex meat, grains of einkorn wheat, and animal fat, a combination that reflected the diet of someone surviving high in the Alpine mountains during the Copper Age. Inside his intestines, they found whipworm parasites, a reminder of the difficult health conditions of his time. Traces of ash in his lungs showed that he had been close to a wood fire shortly before his death, possibly for warmth or cooking. Each discovery brought a new layer of understanding, but the most thrilling possibility for scientists came from his DNA. In 2012, after years of delicate preparation, researchers managed to extract and map a rough version of Ötzi's genome, his complete set of genetic material. At that time, ancient DNA sequencing was still a young and challenging science, so the achievement was considered groundbreaking. From this first genetic map, scientists concluded that Ötzi had light skin and brown eyes, a result that surprised many because it did not match earlier assumptions based on his mummified appearance. The most shocking detail, however, came from the discovery of what appeared to be steppe ancestry in his DNA. Genetic traces linked to the Indo-European peoples who would later spread widely across Europe. This was unexpected because history placed the arrival of such ancestry in Central Europe centuries after Ötzi's life. If correct, the finding would push back the timeline of these migrations by hundreds of years, suggesting that population movements into Europe happened far earlier than recorded. The announcement drew enormous interest. Ötzi was no longer just an archaeological treasure. He was being portrayed as a living link between ancient Europeans and later migrating peoples. His DNA seemed to challenge established timelines, and many saw this as a major shift in the understanding of prehistoric Europe. But not everyone was convinced. Some experts warned that contamination was a serious risk when working with ancient DNA. Modern genetic material from researchers, or even from the environment, could easily mix with the ancient samples, creating misleading results. Despite these warnings, the 2012 findings were widely accepted, and the image of Ötzi as a genetic bridge between different populations became part of his story. As time passed, however, the science of ancient DNA advanced quickly. By 2023, new methods and stricter safeguards had transformed the field. Ancient genome sequencing was no longer an uncertain experiment. It had matured into a discipline where every step was carefully monitored to prevent errors. A team of leading geneticists from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology and URAC Research decided to take another look at Ötzi's DNA using the most advanced tools available. Their aim was to start from the beginning, removing any doubt about contamination and producing a complete, accurate genome. This time, they chose to extract DNA from a fragment of Ötzi's hip bone, a dense part of the skeleton less likely to be damaged or contaminated. The process was extremely delicate, as ancient DNA is fragile and broken into countless tiny pieces after thousands of years. Each stage of the work demanded absolute precision to avoid introducing modern DNA into the sample. The team handled the remains with the greatest care, working slowly to ensure that what they recovered was truly ancient and untouched. When the new sequencing was completed, the results caused shock and disbelief. The so-called step ancestry that had been the focus of so much excitement in 2012 was gone. It had never been there in the first place. The earlier result, it turned out, had been caused by contamination from modern DNA, which had created the false appearance of an ancestral connection that did not exist. The clean, uncontaminated genome told a completely different story. Ötzi was not the genetic link between ancient Europeans and later Indo-European migrants. His DNA did not shift the migration timeline, and it did not match the claims that had been made for more than a decade. For researchers who had supported the earlier conclusions, this was a difficult moment. Years of discussions, theories, and historical interpretations built on the 2012 findings now had to be reconsidered. The correction was not just a small adjustment, it was a major change that overturned what had been seen as a remarkable breakthrough. The man once thought to connect distant populations in Europe was now understood in a completely different way. This reversal became a powerful reminder of the risks in rushing to conclusions, especially in a field as delicate as ancient DNA research. The first genome sequence had been a remarkable achievement for its time, but the technology then was far more vulnerable to contamination. The excitement over such an important find had overshadowed the caution that should have been applied before declaring a major historical revision. The new study showed that even the most celebrated discoveries must be tested, challenged, and confirmed with the best available methods before they can be trusted. Ötzi's genetic story, once seen as a key to rewriting Europe's prehistoric map, had to be told again. This time with accuracy that left no room for false assumptions. Instead of being remembered as a bridge between distant peoples, he now stood as an example of how science is constantly evolving and how the truth can emerge only through careful, repeated study. And with all the clues they got from his DNA, something was still missing. The forgotten clues in his skin. While the sequencing of Ötzi's DNA stunned the world, Another silent breakthrough came from the surface of his skin. Initially, researchers had written off the strange dark lines and dots on his mummified body as random marks from freezing. But when examined under high-resolution 3D microscopes, these were revealed to be tattoos, 61 in total, placed in specific, deliberate patterns. What shocked experts was their placement. Many of these marks aligned almost perfectly with acupuncture points still recognized in traditional Chinese medicine, despite Ötzi living thousands of years before acupuncture was documented. This suggested that his people had developed their own form of therapeutic body marking, possibly to relieve pain. Analysis of the pigment inside the tattoos revealed it wasn't just ordinary soot. It contained microscopic particles of charred medicinal herbs, including hints of artemisia and valeriana, plants known for pain relief and anti-inflammatory properties. Even stranger, some of these plants did not grow in the Alps where Ötzi passed away, meaning he had either traveled long distances or traded with distant tribes to obtain them. The location of many tattoos also hinted at specific ailments. Lines along his lower spine and knee areas suggested chronic joint pain, possibly arthritis. Tiny clusters near his ankles hinted at treatment for long-term injuries, perhaps from constant mountain trekking or hunting. In effect, his skin was a living medical record, charting both his health struggles and the ancient remedies he used to combat them. One theory now gaining traction is that Ötzi may have sought out a specialist healer, someone whose knowledge of herbal medicine and pain management was centuries ahead of their time. This paints a new picture. Ötzi was not simply a lone wanderer, but part of a network that valued and exchanged advanced health knowledge. This discovery didn't just add to his story, it rewrote it. Far from being just a frozen relic, Ötzi became a testament to humanity's deep-rooted ingenuity, resilience, and desire to heal. So, where do you think Ötzi came from originally? The roots of Ötzi, the story we never expected. For many years, the story of Ötzi was told through scattered clues, the objects found with him, the food in his stomach, and reconstructions based on the little we thought we knew. Scientists and the public alike built an image of him that seemed certain, a fair-skinned man with light eyes and thick brown hair walking the icy mountains of Europe thousands of years ago. This picture was comforting to some because it fit neatly with modern expectations about Europe's ancient past. Museums displayed this version of Ötzi. Documentaries recreated his face. People felt they knew him. But in 2023, everything changed. New DNA sequencing, using technology far beyond what had been available in earlier studies, uncovered a story that was far more surprising and far less familiar. This was not just a small correction to old findings, it was a complete transformation of how we saw him, and by extension, how we understood prehistoric Europe. The fresh genetic data showed that over 92% of Ötzi's ancestry came from Neolithic Anatolian farmers, people who had migrated into Europe from the region we now call Turkey about 8,000 years ago. These were not ordinary travelers. They were among the first to bring agriculture to Europe, carrying seeds, domestic animals, and new tools that would change human life forever. They shaped a turning point in history. Villages replaced temporary camps, pottery appeared, and societies began to settle rather than roam. The remaining 8% of Ötzi's genetic makeup came from Europe's older hunter-gatherer populations, the people who had lived on the continent long before farming arrived. This small percentage revealed something fascinating. It suggested that Ötzi's ancestors had settled in Europe early and then stayed apart from most of the later waves of population movement. While much of Europe experienced huge changes as new groups arrived and mixed, his lineage remained isolated for generations. This isolation meant something profound. Ötzi was not a direct ancestor to modern Europeans. Instead, He was a representative of a nearly vanished branch of humanity. His DNA preserved the signature of those early Anatolian farmers, mostly untouched by the migrations that followed. Over thousands of years, this genetic line was almost entirely erased, surviving only in a few scattered places. One of those places was not where many would expect. Ötzi's closest living genetic relatives are not in the Alps, where his body was found, nor in the surrounding areas of Austria or northern Italy. Instead, they live far away on the island of Sardinia in the Mediterranean Sea. The people of Sardinia are known for their unique genetic history. Because of their island's isolation, they avoided much of the mixing that happened across mainland Europe. Like Ötzi, their ancestry is deeply rooted in the same Neolithic farming populations. This connection meant that while Ötzi's lineage disappeared from most of Europe, a piece of it quietly survived on this island. This discovery shifted his role in history. Rather than being a bridge between ancient and modern Europeans, he was part of a branch that came close to disappearing entirely, a genetic dead end whose story had been frozen in time for thousands of years. The surprises did not end there. The same study that revealed his ancestry also challenged everything we thought he looked like. For decades, reconstructions had shown him with pale skin, light eyes, and thick brown hair. These details were not guessed at randomly. They were based on the best evidence available at the time. Yet, they were still wrong. The advanced genetic analysis, combined with new forensic reconstruction methods, showed something completely different. Ötzi had dark skin, far darker than most modern Europeans, perhaps even darker than many people from southern Europe today. His eyes were brown, not the blue so often imagined. And rather than having a thick head of hair, he was balding, not because of thousands of years in the ice, but because of genetic markers on his X chromosome that showed he had been losing hair during his lifetime. This was not just a shift in appearance. It was a direct challenge to long-held assumptions about Europe's ancient past. For many, seeing Ötzi with darker skin and brown eyes was unsettling because it did not fit the familiar image built over decades. It forced a confrontation with the fact that ancient Europe was more diverse in appearance and ancestry than many had believed. The earlier reconstructions had been made in good faith, using the knowledge and tools available at the time. But they had also been shaped, consciously or unconsciously, by cultural expectations and biases. They reflected the image people wanted to see, rather than the reality. The 2023 findings stripped away that comfort and replaced it with truth. A truth that was more complex, more challenging, and far more interesting. Seeing the real Ötzi meant letting go of the idea that history is a straight line from the past to the present. His existence showed that some lineages thrived for a time and then vanished, leaving almost no trace. Others survived in unexpected places, like Sardinia, far from where they began. It also showed that our mental image of the past is shaped as much by our present-day perspectives as by actual evidence. This revelation carried a deeper lesson about science itself. It reminded us that science is not here to protect the stories we find comforting. It does not shape its results to match what we hope is true. Instead, it uncovers facts, whether or not they fit our expectations. For more than a decade, people had imagined Ötzi in a way that was completely wrong. Not because anyone lied, but because the evidence then was incomplete. The new research did not simply update his story, it transformed it entirely. The man who once stood in the public imagination as a familiar figure from the distant past became something much richer, a symbol of how human history is full of twists, migrations, disappearances, and surprises. His dark skin, brown eyes, and balding head were not small details, but essential parts of understanding who he really was. His ancestry told of a world where people had already been moving, mixing, and changing in ways far more complex than we had believed. But what led to Ötzi's death? Let's find out about the state of this body and system when he was found. A fragile life, frozen in time. Ötzi's body is not just an ancient find preserved in ice. It is the story of a man who once breathed, walked, and endured the weight of life over 5,000 years ago. Beneath the frozen skin and ancient clothing lies a truth that connects him to us in a way we rarely expect from someone so distant in time. His remains reveal not only where he came from, but also the many struggles he carried until the final moments of his life. When scientists studied his DNA, they found something startling. His genes carried signs of illnesses we often think of as modern: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, arthritis, lactose intolerance, and even a tendency toward obesity. These were not just problems of the present day. They were already part of human life during the Copper Age. In his case, they were written deep into his genetic code, waiting to affect his health long before medicine could ever name them. The signs of suffering did not stop with his DNA. His body showed the wear and tear of a life lived in constant hardship. He had painful ulcers and gallstones. He was infected with Lyme disease, making him the oldest known human to carry it. Inside his intestines, parasites were feeding on him, further draining his strength. His blood carried pathogens, and his body showed signs of aging and inflammation. By the time of his death, Ötzi was not the strong, tireless hunter many might imagine. He was a man weighed down by pain, moving through life with a body that was breaking down. One of the most telling details lay on his skin. He had tattoos, not decorative ones, but marks placed on specific points of his body, likely for pain relief from arthritis. These were his way of trying to ease the constant ache in his joints. It is a deeply human image, a man thousands of years ago turning to the tools and traditions of his time to find some comfort from the pain. The picture that emerges is not of a romantic, simple past, but of a reality as harsh as today, if not harsher. Ancient life was not free from disease or struggle. It was raw and unprotected. People faced the same vulnerabilities we do now, often without the means to treat them. Ötzi's story is proof that the human body has always been fragile, no matter the century. Yet, his body held another mystery: his ancestry. Scientists were puzzled by how pure and unchanged his genetic line seemed to be. In a world where people had been moving, mixing, and reshaping the population of Europe for thousands of years, why did Ötzi's DNA stand apart? The answer lay in where he lived and how his people lived. Ötzi belonged to a small, isolated community high in the mountains. The rugged terrain, along with cultural boundaries, kept them apart from the waves of migrants who brought new bloodlines into other parts of Europe. His people were descendants of Neolithic Anatolian farmers who had come from the region we now call Turkey thousands of years earlier. While other parts of the continent saw these farmers mixing with local hunter-gatherers and later with steppe herders, Ötzi's community stayed separate. In many ways, they were like an island, not surrounded by water, but by steep valleys and snow-covered peaks. This isolation kept their culture and traditions intact, but it also meant that harmful genetic mutations could build up over time. Without new genetic diversity from outside groups, illnesses and weaknesses could be passed down and become more common. This lack of fresh genes may have made them more vulnerable to disease and less able to survive big changes in their environment. Ötzi's body, frozen for thousands of years, offers a rare glimpse of what can happen when a community remains too isolated for too long. His lineage did not last. It disappeared into history, replaced by the flood of new peoples and cultures that transformed Europe. His frozen form is one of the last echoes of a way of life that could not withstand the tides of migration and change. The end of his life was as dramatic as the story his DNA tells. In the days before his death, Ötzi likely traveled across rough mountain paths, moving quickly through dangerous open landscapes. His journey was not one of leisure. The clues in his final meals and belongings suggest urgency. He ate 2 large meals not long before his death, perhaps to prepare for a long trip or to recover his strength after a hard climb. He carried weapons with him, well-maintained and recently repaired. These were tools for both hunting and protection. They hint at a man who was cautious, aware of danger, and ready to defend himself if needed. Yet even with his preparations, something or someone was closing in on him. The evidence points to a violent end. An arrow struck him in the left shoulder from behind, a shot that was both precise and deadly. Whoever attacked him removed the arrow's shaft, leaving only the head lodged deep in his muscle. This was no accident. It was a clear, intentional strike meant to destroy. Whether he was hunted, ambushed, or betrayed, the attack left him no chance. High in the Alps, far from help, his life ended. The snow and ice that quickly covered his body preserved not only his face and clothes, but also the final chapter of his story, one that would remain hidden for over 5,000 years. Today, we see Ötzi not as a distant, cold figure from prehistory, but as a man whose struggles mirror our own. He faced disease, pain, and danger. He lived in a community bound together by tradition, yet vulnerable because of its isolation. He carried the weight of both personal weakness and the limitations of his people's way of life. And in the end, his death was sudden and violent, the kind of ending that could strike anyone in a dangerous world. His body may have been frozen, but his story is alive. It speaks of resilience in the face of suffering, of human connections to place and ancestry, and of the delicate balance between survival and vulnerability. Ötzi's life, from his inherited illnesses to his final desperate moments, is a reminder that human history is not just about progress or strength. It is about endurance, fragility, and the choices and chances that decide our fate. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.